This video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Attack of the Clones, the least popular Star Wars movie, or at least it was until the sequel trilogy came out. But why, though? Is it actually all that bad to be worthy of so much hate over the years? I mean, I never thought it was that bad growing up, but there are some pretty strong arguments against it on the internet that I have seen over the years. But if I were to take another look again at this movie, would it actually be all that bad? Or will it be just as good as I remember? Well, strap in, folks, because
that's why I'm here.
Let's start from the beginning, and I mean the very beginning, right when the ship blows up at the start of the movie. I really like this first scene because of the fact that it immediately establishes a threat, both immediate and in the background, since we know someone is after Padme, but we don't know for certain who it is yet, or what exactly they are planning. Padme immediately suspects Count Dooku, and while her suspicions do in fact turn out to be true, the movie doesn't actually make it entirely clear until later on that it is in fact him behind everything. I suppose there is one minor criticism I can give to this scene, which is that we don't actually see Count Dooku before he's thrown under suspicion. But at the same time, if they did show him, it probably would make it way too obvious that he was in fact the one responsible for this event. So I can see why George Lucas did make the decision to keep Count Dooku's presence in the movie entirely in the background until he shows up near the end. And of course, I can't forget to mention when another certain set of characters show up, that of course being the iconic duo of Anakin and Obi Wan. Now finally, as we know them, unlike in The Phantom Menace, where both of them are very different from how they usually are since it's so much further in the past. I think one thing that people don't give this movie enough credit for is just how well this movie establishes the relationship between Anakin and Obi Wan. Whilst there are scenes of them explaining all the great things they did off-screen and all the bonding they've had over the years, that we unfortunately don't get to see.
I haven't felt you this tense since we fell into that nest of gundogs.
You fell into that nightmare, Master, and I rescued you, remember?
Oh, yes.
It's not like it's all tell and no show, since we can clearly see by their basic interactions how well they know each other now. And it makes those stories they tell at the beginning believable, because when we see them in the other scenes, we never doubt for a second that all those other things they said happened.
Oh yes, and I should probably also mention that Jar Jar has appeared in this scene as well. And to anyone who was upset at his presence in the previous movie, they need fear not, because he is not in this one much. Even though I personally never disliked Jar Jar, I don't mind that he's not in this movie too much, since his role in this movie is pretty well written in my opinion. We can see that he too has matured quite a bit over the years, taking himself a lot more seriously these days, since he has important business to do in the Senate representing his people, the Gungans. Unfortunately for him though, he ends up in a position that isn't too great, and is ultimately manipulated by the 4D chess master Palpatine into making his plans go perfectly. And Palpatine's manipulation here is really clever too, since he essentially tricks Jar Jar into believing that he has to do what he wants him to do because it's what Padme would want to do, and all without ever explicitly saying so.
But what senator would have the courage to propose such a radical amendment?
If only Senator Amidala were here.
And you honestly feel so bad for Jar Jar when he does ultimately give Palpatine what he wants, thinking he's done the right thing. If only he knew what were yet to come. You know, I bet the reason why Palpatine was so easily able to manipulate the Republic is probably because he steals all the Republic's digital and personal data. Man, if only there was a way to stop people like that from doing things like that to us in real life. What's that? Something about a shark? Yes, in fact, my friends, there is a way to stop corporations and websites from stealing all your digital data. And that is Surfshark VPN, a virtual private network service provider. Surfshark will encrypt all your digital data so that way companies can't take your information and use it to manipulate you. And that's not all. You can also use Surfshark to change your digital location so that you can appear as though you are anywhere in the entire world. Not only does this further help keep your private information secure, but it will also allow you to unblock all the region locks on certain websites. For example, allowing you to see the full library of content available on your favorite streaming service. This can be very useful if you're on vacation and you want to still have access to all the original content from your home region. Surfshark will also help you to block ads, trackers, malware, and phishing attempts. further securing your internet privacy. And all of this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Surfshark's many tools and beneficial features. So what are you waiting for? Use the link in the description down below to get an exclusive Surfshark holiday deal. Enter promo code ROCKETAR to get an additional 6 months for free, plus a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk to try it. I feel a whole lot more safe and secure every time I use Surfshark when I'm browsing the web, and I've made sure to get a lot out of the special tools they offer. Remember, link in the description down below, promo code ROCKETAR. And of course, a massive thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring this video.
Now, back to the attack. And then, of course, there's another very important element in this movie, which is introduced when they show up, the Anakin and Padme romance. Probably the biggest criticism most people throw at this movie. Although I'm not entirely sure if most of the criticism for this first scene is all that fair. People say that Anakin acts all creepy and weird, but Padme's totally into that creepy weirdness, which is so untrue. When he acts a bit creepy and weird here in this scene, it's not like he's trying to be creepy, and I don't think anyone in the audience could effectively lie to me and say that they didn't come off as creepy the first time they had a crush on someone. And yes, for the record, that does include me. And on top of that, Padme does not at all find Anakin's awkward, kinda creepy attitude here attractive in the slightest.
Please don't look at me like that.
Why not?
It makes me feel uncomfortable.
And it's only later on in the movie when she gets to know him better again that he isn't actually a creep and he was just kind of being awkward. Since Anakin in general is awkward when it comes to relationships, except of course Obi Wan, since he's always hanging out with him and he's just used to him by this point. I mean, it also takes Anakin a very long time to fully warm up to Ahsoka in the Clone Wars as well, which is more proof of what I'm saying. But fear not, everyone, because the next scene is something that I'm sure everyone can be on board with agreeing is a great scene. The bounty hunter chase. I honestly don't think people appreciate how good this scene actually is. It's fast-paced, exciting, extremely unique, and the banter between Obi Wan and Anakin is legendary here.
That was some shortcut, Anakin. He went completely the other way. Once again, you've proved...
If you'll excuse me.
I hate it when he does that.
Oh, and also did I mention the music during this scene? Just more great stuff from John Williams. In fact, this whole movie has a great soundtrack for the record. I mean, the man basically never misses. Unless it's The Fall of Skywalker where they just reuse all his old songs from the prior movies. Honestly, the only real criticism I can even think of for this entire sequence is Obi-Wan getting extremely lucky when he catches Anakin's lightsaber after he drops it. But that's really it. Honestly, the rest of the scene is basically perfect. And honestly, so is the very next scene, the legendary club scene. You know, the one with the...
You want to buy some death sticks?
You don't want to sell me death sticks.
I don't want to sell you death sticks.
You want to go home and rethink your life.
I want to go home and rethink my life.
bit. One thing I really like too about this scene that no one really mentions is the difference between the tactics of Anakin and Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan is more patient and waits for the right opportunity to strike, whereas Anakin mostly jumps right into it, trying to search out the problem for himself and find an immediate solution. And the movie does this without ever stating this is the specific way the characters do things. It simply shows us the difference in how they handle the situation. Alas, after this, our good friends Anakin and Obi-Wan will mostly be split apart for the rest of the movie, since these events are simply too much danger for Padme to be left unprotected, but Obi-Wan has a mystery to solve. And let me start by discussing that specific plotline, since I think it'll be easier to do one at a time instead of jumping back and forth between the two like the movie does. I have always found the mystery of the Dart and Kamino and the clones and everything to do with Obi-Wan's story some of the most interesting, engaging, and entertaining segments of any piece of Star Wars media. And it saddens me that these elements just don't get that much respect. I often hear a lot of people sort of hand-wave, oh, the Obi-Wan parts were okay, but that is totally underselling how good most of these scenes actually are. I mean, first of all, there's the iconic Dex's Diner scene. I like how this scene shows us a much more casual side of Coruscant as a planet. That there are just everyday average restaurants and diners on the streets of the city, and not just big important buildings like the Jedi Temple or the Senate building. Additionally, I also like that it shows us that Obi-Wan has a life outside of just being a Jedi, since oftentimes we think of Jedis as being completely disconnected from the rest of reality, which is a thing that Anakin himself dispels in this very movie.
Compassion, which I would define as unconditional love, is central to a Jedi's life. So you might say that we are encouraged to love.
but that's also a key factor in the overall story of the future Clone Wars series and Revenge of the Sith. The idea that the Jedi do end up becoming too detached from reality, and they lose all these real connections they had, being so focused on just winning the war. But all that hasn't happened yet, so let me rewind back to what I was saying. Another scene I really like is when Obi Wan can't find the planet Kamino, even though it should exist in a specific spot, because he's so used to following the rules and everything that makes logical sense that he often has trouble thinking outside the box. And since Anakin isn't here to help him, it ultimately ends up being a child who comes up with the answer. I just think it's a very nice, touching scene, showing that even when you think you know all the answers, the correct solution may come from someone you least expect. And of course, when Obi-Wan actually finds Kamino right where it's supposed to be, we are blessed with one of the greatest planets in Star Wars history, a vast ocean, with beautiful silver buildings sticking out on top of it. The bright white interiors are also a nice touch that contrasts the dark storminess outside. It's just such an amazing design, and perfectly alien, since there isn't any place on Earth quite like it. One thing I really like about the creation of the clones here is how it's very suspicious, but all the characters ultimately end up being distracted from just how suspicious it is by the villains immediately creating a problem that needs to be solved and can only be solved by this mysterious solution already laid out for them. It keeps us, the audience, wondering why such a thing is so suspicious and so perfectly planned out, but keeps the true answer a secret until the next movie to keep us engaged and want to watch the full trilogy and see the entire story play out. It's honestly a really clever move on George Lucas's part. Oh, and speaking of the clones, I should probably discuss the CGI elephant in the room. Yes, just like The Phantom Menace before it, this movie has also come under a lot of fire for its use of CGI. And to be fair, there is more CGI in this movie than The Phantom Menace, and it doesn't look much better. In fact, there's maybe even a few scenes where it arguably looks worse. So I will say, the CGI complaint is definitely most apt when it comes to this movie. But I do actually think that, for the most part, the clones themselves look fine, and I've been pretty convinced on most of my watchings that they are in fact real people. It's just most of the other CGI elements that aren't quite as good. Besides, if you've seen the Clone Wars, you're very used to looking at CGI clones. Plus, whenever there is a shot of their face, it is the actual real actor, Tamora Morrison. So it's not like they're entirely CGI. Honestly, the shot of all the clones eating dinner while Obi-Wan watches from the platform above is actually quite an impressive shot in my opinion, as is just seeing the entire armies of them marching into the ships. But of course, I can't forget to discuss the source of all the clones, Jango Fett.
I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the universe.
He may not be one of the most standout villains in Star Wars history, but I think he leaves a rather menacing impression in his short amount of time in this movie. It never feels like there's a scene with him that's wasted. He's always doing something important, even if that important thing is eventually him dying. And I really like just how resourceful he is. The fact that he can put up a fight against a Jedi without even having a lightsaber. I also really love just how mischievous young Boba Fett is too, constantly trying to get in on the fun and make things harder for Obi-Wan. It's also pretty unique since you don't really see children helping their evil parents very often in movies, but also simultaneously coming off as believable. Yet somehow, this movie actually manages to pull it off. And just the whole atmosphere of this fight between Jango Fett and Obi-Wan is really great too, with the rain and storm all around them, and the threat of potentially falling into the ocean around them. Really great stuff, honestly. And ironically, this battle scene right here might actually be better than the final battle at the end of the movie, now that I think about it. Or at least all the parts that don't involve Yoda of that scene. But anyways, there's also the space section right afterwards, where Obi-Wan is not giving up the chase just yet. And this might actually be one of the best space battle sequences in any Star Wars movie. Which is funny because there's only 2 ships, and not a lot of firing at each other, actually. Mostly a lot of dodging and running away, primarily on Obi-Wan's part. And also the line about Obi-Wan hating flying.
Blast, this is why I hate flying.
Referring back to him denying the very same thing Anakin claimed earlier in the movie.
Sorry, Master. I forgot you don't like flying.
I don't mind flying, but what you're doing is suicide.
It's some genuinely funny dialogue. And of course, I can't not mention the absolutely amazing sound effect when Jango Fett drops his giant shockwave bombs. Just so good. And of course, this brings us to Geonosis,
Oh, and one thing I like about the planet Geonosis in this movie is the fact that even though it is technically just another desert planet like Tatooine or a bunch more the sequel trilogy gave us for some reason, it still distinctly stands out from all those other planets due to its far more interesting landscape and geography. Plus, instead of just being yellow, it's more of an orangish color. Overall, it has a lot more of a creepy vibe to it, which I like. I also think the Geonosians themselves add a lot to this creepy vibe, being one of this movie's many amazing alien races introduced into Star Wars, a trend that has continued from The Phantom Menace, you know, with the aliens being a lot more alien and interesting. And I think a lot of people often forget just how creative some of the aliens in this movie are. Changelings, Kaminoans, whatever species Dexter Jettster is, that if he didn't exist, we wouldn't have Pong Krell in the Clone Wars. But I'm still trying to think if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I just have to give credit to all the really amazing alien designs that are in this movie that no one ever mentions just how good they actually are. It's here on Geonosis
where Obi Wan finally discovers the truth of the matter, that Count Dooku is in fact behind everything.
It's a great pity that our paths have never crossed before, Obi Wan. Qui-Gon always spoke very highly of you.
One thing I really like about Count Dooku in this movie as a villain is the fact that he was once a Jedi, showing that it is in fact capable for a Jedi to fall to the dark side, something which connects to Anakin's overall story. But on top of that, he isn't pure evil. He genuinely believes that joining the Sith and abandoning the Republic is the best thing to do since the Republic has stopped caring about other systems, and that they have lost their way. Their power is too great, and they have to be steered in the right direction by someone who knows better, aka his master. And I like that he does also offer Obi-Wan the chance to join him instead of being killed. But of course, Obi-Wan, like many of the other Jedi, is starting to become disillusioned to certain aspects. And because he's such a rule follower, he could never consider the Jedi to actually be wrong or have done anything so bad that people would actually want to turn away from them. And so he doesn't actually see any of the points that Count Dooku is making, and simply believes him to be a complete liar about everything he says, including the fact that a Sith Lord is in fact in charge of everything going on in the Republic.
And I also can't forget to mention just how good of a job Christopher Lee does playing Count Dooku. He manages to give him such a refined gentleman attitude, but with a sinister, darker side underneath, which perfectly fits the way his character is written and meant to be.
Qui-Gon Jinn would never join you.
Don't be so sure, my young Jedi. You forget that he was once my apprentice, just as you were once his. He knew all about the corruption in the Senate, but he would never have gone along with it if he had learned the truth as I have.
The truth?
The truth.
Although, if I am being honest, I probably do somewhat prefer Corey Burton's more sinister take on the character from the Clone Wars. But that doesn't mean Christopher Lee is any less amazing than he is in this movie.
He's definitely a very underrated character in my opinion, and his side of the story ends with him calling out to our friends on the other side of the story. So now it is time to discuss the most controversial aspect of this movie, the entire Anakin and Padme B-plot. There's not too much to say about them immediately after they depart from Obi-Wan at the beginning of the movie, outside of that nice little scene where Anakin mentions how all Jedi are supposed to care that I already brought up. It's not really until they get to Naboo that things get interesting. Anakin and Padme on Naboo is pretty much a cursed sentence in the Star Wars fanbase, because it is guaranteed to bring up memories of one of these scenes.
I don't like sand.
Now that I'm with you again, I'm in agony. The thought of not being with you. I can't breathe.
And yes, I do have to admit, a lot of these scenes are kind of awkward, and perhaps not the most well-written, but there is a decent excuse, I guess, that could explain this, and that's simply that not only is Anakin awkward, but so is Padme, and therefore all the scenes are awkward. Which I guess makes sense. The only problem is, it doesn't make the scenes less awkward. And you know what really baffles me? The fact that there are several deleted scenes where Anakin and Padme first show up on Naboo and visit her parents before all that other stuff with the lake and whatnot, which are honestly better than most of the scenes that are in the actual movie. I honestly think that the Anakin and Padme romance would come off as a lot more natural if they had kept in some of these scenes. Like, they're really good. Plus there's some really great world building too, since Padme mentions all her friends that she used to have and all the people that she's helped by being a senator. Although one thing I'm definitely glad they did keep in the movie are some scenes where Padme is talking to the new Queen of Naboo, which are are also some really great world building, since it shows that she's not just the Queen of Naboo, and on Naboo, queens are more like presidents in that they are elected by the people, which seems to be a really big confusion with a lot of the Star Wars fanbase, since they wonder how Padme got downgraded to a senator from being a queen. That's not what happened. Her term ended, and so she decided to become a senator so she could continue to help people and do good. There was no downgrading whatsoever. But I would definitely be lying if I said any of these scenes were more interesting than what happens next. Anakin's dream of his mother dying, and subsequent return to Tatooine. Even though some of this stuff with Padme and Anakin on Naboo is a bit weak, I actually think that most of the stuff on Tatooine is pretty strong. First of all, something really underrated that I like is when Anakin meets Watto again, and we see that he's even more of a loser now than he was in The Phantom Menace. Meanwhile, Anakin has gone on to become a great Jedi, which is a really nice subtle way to show that the guy who employed slaves is just a loser, whilst the slave himself has gone on to become a great person, and that you'll never get anywhere in life or become a great person by treating others as lesser than yourself. And then after that, we get to see the good old Luke Skywalker home, but you know, before he ever lived there. And here we see that Anakin is determined not to let anything bad happen to his mother, no matter what. And despite hearing the horrific story, he refuses to give up hope, setting out to save her regardless of what everyone else thinks. And I think most people don't give the scene where he finds his mother dying enough credit as well. It's honestly a very emotional scene, since this is the first time his mother has seen him since he left to become a Jedi all those years ago in The Phantom Menace. And it's the first time he has seen her. And it's just so tragic that the only time he ever gets to see her again after those days, despite promising to come back and free her, is when she is dying, beaten up, bloody, barely any life left in her, only struggling to stay alive just long enough with the hope that she might be able to see her son one last time. Something which completely breaks Anakin, since it means he will no longer be able to keep that promise he made to her all those years ago. Something stolen away from him by evil, savage monsters. In fact, the only minor nitpick I have against this scene is that when his mother does die, the way she just kind of falls over limp is a little bit ridiculous. But it's not so bad that it ruins the scene or anything. And even though what Anakin does next is wrong, it's very easy to see his point of view. Oh, and also, so many people go on about how Anakin's turn to the dark side is so rushed, when this movie takes place before the entirety of the Clone Wars and he's already doing dark stuff like this. I've never understood that argument at all, especially not with how much the Clone Wars fleshes out his turn to the dark side. One thing I really like about Anakin's dark actions here is that even after his mother is dead and buried, when he's at her grave, he doesn't at all consider what he did with his actions. The only thing he can think about is how he couldn't save her.
I wasn't strong enough to save you, Mom.
And in the prior scene with Padme, which is very infamous for that he basically just says all the terrible things he does, and Padme basically doesn't bat an eye. People love to say, oh my goodness, she finds how dark he is to be so attractive, which is totally not what happens in this scene once again. It's more so that Padme is just in shock of what he said.
They're dead. Every single one of them. And not just the men, but the women. And the children, too. They're like animals, and I slaughtered them like animals. I hate them.
It's not that she agrees that what he did was right or anything. She feels bad for Anakin for what happened, and she understands why he did it even if it was wrong. And she doesn't actually know who the Tusken Raiders are, so for all she knows, they're just as monstrous as Anakin claims. So her reaction after this is that she wants to comfort him, to help him. It's not that she finds this romantically attractive. I'm so tired of that meme. And of course, right around now is when Anakin and Padme get the call to head to Geonosis and save Obi Wan. Well, technically that's not what they were supposed to do, but that's what they did anyways. I mean, they also did do what they were supposed to do, redirect the message to Coruscant. But once Padme sets her mind on something, there is no stopping her. Something which is consistent with how she acted in The Phantom Menace before this point. And honestly, I like how brave Padme is despite all the terrible situations going on around her, which proves further my point in the Phantom Menace video about how strong of a character and how underrated she actually is. And now is when the movie decides to bless us again with another instantly iconic scene, the droid factory. This may actually be one of the greatest action scenes in any movie period. It's extremely visually creative, it has great world building in the form of showing us how all the battle droids are actually created, the danger is immediate, and also highly unique and interesting. since it isn't an active enemy trying to attack our main characters, but them simply trying to survive in this extremely dangerous environment. Oh, and I suppose I should also probably mention the R2-D2 and C-3PO shenanigans, something which mostly starts to kick in around this point, since C-3PO isn't reintroduced until they get to Tatooine, and he doesn't really do much until they leave Tatooine. I've heard a lot of people say that the cartoonish shenanigans of C-3PO and R2-D2 in this movie are too silly.
Goodness, shut me down. Machines making machines. How perverse.
But honestly, I couldn't disagree more. I mean, C-3PO and R2-D2 were always the most cartoonish aspect of the original movies anyways, and while this is definitely a step above that in terms of cartoonishness,
I'm so confused.
C-3PO's lines are just too funny to not like. And R2-D2 having to be the hero who saves C-3PO from all his problems is also really funny too, in my opinion. I mean, how can you not like...
Now where are you taking me? This is such a drag.
Are you a heartless monster? Oh, and speaking of funny shenanigans, when Anakin and Padme do get caught and are finally reunited with Obi Wan, this line is honestly really funny.
I retransmitted it just as you had requested, Master. Then we decided to come and rescue you.
Good job.
Sorry, I just had to bring it up. It's just one of the funniest lines in all of Star Wars history, in my opinion. And at last, the epic final battles of this movie can begin. And yes, that is battle, since it's basically a 3-in-1 combo pack. Except unlike the Phantom Menace final battle, where everything is going on around the same time, it's instead more of a step-by-step process. First the arena, then the big clone attack in the wastelands, and then the Count Dooku final battle. So of course first we must start with the arena battle, which I really like because of, yet again, how unique it is, which is really a theme with this movie, a ton of really unique and interesting ideas. That being that our 3 captured heroes must survive in a Roman-esque Colosseum against massive terrifying alien beasts, all with distinct dangerous abilities, which are showcased very well in my opinion. And it's really great to see our heroes overcome these threats without even needing a single weapon.
She can't do that. Shoot her or something.
Showing just how resourceful and intelligent they actually are, without ever needing to tell us. And even when they do get backed up against a wall by the infinite armies of droids, backup arrives just in time for the epic, massive Jedi battle. It's honestly really cool seeing this many Jedi in one place at the same time, all fighting for their survival. The actual fighting itself that happens during this scene isn't exactly the most impressive, as this video of someone slowing down the battle to see everything going on showcases. By the way, it's a great video, you should totally watch it, and all their other ones slowing down these scenes. It really is just a lot of flailing of things, spinning in circles and whatnot. But since most of that happens in the background, and you can barely see it unless, you know, like that guy, you slow it down, the movie mostly gets away with it. Oh, and did you know this scene was originally going to be a lot longer too? Like, the Jedi were actually going to continue into the next part of the battle, invading a droid control ship just like in the Phantom Menace, trying to shut off all the droids, only for it to not work since they're now independently controlled instead of by a single ship, but it was just too long, so they cut it. But there are some interesting unfinished fragments you can watch as a deleted scene on one of the releases, I believe. Although I think cutting it was probably for the best. There is already a lot of other action at the end of this movie, and the pacing just about comes through as it is. Then of course, as the characters are once again backed against a wall, Yoda shows up to save them with the convenient army already laid out for him. But like I said before, it's convenient intentionally for plot purposes relating to Revenge of the Sith, so that's not a complaint for the record. Anywho, there's not much to actually mention about the epic clone battlefield scene since, well, it's just kind of a bunch of action happening in the background. It's not really until Anakin and Obi Wan catch up to Count Dooku and meet him just as he's about to escape that things actually get more interesting. I wouldn't call this lightsaber fight here that takes place one of the greatest in all of Star Wars history or anything. In fact, it's probably one of the weakest, if not the weakest, of the entire prequel trilogy, but I'll still take it over any of the sequel trilogy lightsaber fights. I honestly don't know what happened when they were making the sequels that caused the lightsaber fights to be so downgraded. One thing I really do like, though, about throughout this lightsaber fight is Anakin getting his arm cut off, which perfectly poetically ties back to Luke and how he got his hand cut off, which will ultimately combine in one of the best scenes in all of Star Wars in Return of the Jedi, but, that's for another video. But the way it relates to this movie in particular is also great, because it shows that Anakin's rash, strike first, ask questions later attitude does have consequences, especially when he acts emotionally, as he does in this specific scene. As I mentioned earlier, though, of course, the actual fight itself does in fact get a bit better once Yoda shows up and does all his massive flip spin thingies. Oh, and that...
Much to learn, you still have.
Is just perfection. Really putting Count Dooku in his place for thinking that he does know better than the Jedi, even if he is right about a few things here and there. Unfortunately, though, Count Dooku is still cunning and manages to escape. And unfortunately for our heroes, from this point onwards, the mystery only deepens and the Clone Wars have begun. In retrospect, I don't think Attack of the Clones is nearly as bad as most people seem to make it out to be. It definitely has flaws, I won't deny that, but I don't think the flaws are so big that they take away from everything this movie does right. All the great, unique, creative, well-directed, exciting, interesting scenes that also exist. I also think there's a subtle genius in this movie in how it once again lays the seeds that our heroes, the good guys, aren't perfect. And it is their very mistakes that have both caused a lot of the problems in the first place and will ultimately lead to their downfall in the end. So whilst this movie may be my least favorite of the prequels, and perhaps also my least favorite of all of George Lucas's original 6 movies, but that doesn't necessarily make it bad. It's just the weakest of a very strong selection in my opinion. And so I think this movie deserves at least a little bit more credit and respect than it gets.
Hey, you can't just leave like that. You probably haven't even left a comment yet. But please do leave a comment. I actually am very interested to see what you guys think of this video and the movie as a whole. Negative or positive opinions, all are welcome here. I'd also like to remind you that I am also on several social media platforms if you want to follow me, any of these ones around me, links in the description down below. I also have a second channel dedicated to gaming content that I occasionally upload videos to if you want to follow that in case, you happen to be there when I actually upload a video. If you want to engage in more discussion than just the YouTube comment section here, then why don't you join the Reddit community I'm trying to build? I'd really love for you all to join the community and engage together with this group of people I'm trying to build who have similar interests. I also have a Patreon if you're interested in supporting me and want to get early videos and your name in the credits like these fine specimens here. Ed, Macabre Mole, Samir A. Tyke, In7X Voss, Gregory Bronstein, and Emperor Roku. Well, if you must depart to another video, might I suggest going to my prior Phantom Menace video that I made explaining why I think that's actually a pretty good movie and very underrated, or perhaps you could check out this playlist of every Star Wars video I've done so far in my retrospective, although at the time of recording this it's basically just this video and the Phantom Menace one. But to all my future viewers, this is definitely the superior option. But most importantly of all, always remember to be iconic.